So let's discuss a typical problem that an update statement can help us with. So Mary Patterson has informed us that her name is Marie, and she likes to go by that. So we're going to update her email address, and we're going to update her first name to reflect those preferences. So here I have my update statement here, update table name, employees in this case, set clause, and then a comma-separated list of all the columns in that table, employees, that we want to update with new information. So the column name on the left here, and the new statement on the right-hand side of an equal sign, comma-separated. No syntax error with this update statement. However, you should notice we don't have a where clause. So this will update all employees' email addresses and all employees' first name. That's kind of a catastrophic result from this simple statement. But SQL natively has no objection to this. It assumes a programmer knows what you're doing. Just like you can drop a table without notification, you can update the data without error. So let's run this and find out what happens. And we get an error message. You're using safe mode and you tried to update a table without a where that uses a key column. Now, this seems to contradict the idea that the where clause is optional. What's happening here is this is a MySQL workbench protection. And not all clients do that. So MySQL itself has a command line client that doesn't do that type of protection. And if you're issuing JDBC commands or commands from another type of tool, you will have no such protection. So this protection is particular to this MySQL Workbench client. By the way, Microsoft SQL Server product has a very similar tool to MySQL Workbench, and it doesn't have a setting that's a safe mode for this type of update settings. It just assumes that it doesn't do any protection. It assumes you know what you're doing. So I think I can see why that they have this protection here, but I think it can be misleading as well. So let's take a look at the setting here and edit preferences in the SQL Query Editor. Safe updates, rejects updates and deletes with no restrictions. So let's turn that off. That description I think is a little questionable. Let's hit this OK. And you have to restart, it doesn't say this, but you have to restart MySQL for those changes to take effect. So I'll restart MySQL Workbench. And now we should be started with safe mode off. So I'm going to execute this query. And this time, no problem. It goes through because I've turned off safe mode. Again, that's something that's client-side only. So it's relatively thin in terms of protection, in my opinion. Don't get the wrong lesson from it is the most important thing. You're always subject to this. You should always write a where clause in your update statements. I'm going to run the MySQL database again to reestablish it, and we'll go on and look at some where clauses here. So I have a where clause here. It's in a select statement. So you should always test a candidate where clause in a select statement to make sure that you're targeting the right employee. Again, we want to change Mary to Marie. So let's make sure this where clause is selecting for the right employee. So I'll run both queries here. Select everything from all employees, and we can see this is the original query here, unfiltered, and we see Mary Patterson here, and we see that our where clause has successfully filtered for her. We're using the primary key here, and that's the safest way to do this when we incorporate this where clause into our select statement. However, again, it is restricting our update to one record, and that's not always possible. So I'll copy this out and paste it here. We're not operating in safe mode anymore, so this update would go without it. And here we have this where clause, and we'll do this, execute these queries again, and make sure that we've hit make sure that we've updated our statement. So there we have Marie Patterson and her update, and the email is also updated, and we haven't harmed any of our other data. So we've accomplished what we want to do. So let's take a look at a where clause that's not a primary key where clause. So an update statement that doesn't involve a primary key or a key in the where clause for the filter. So we've been informed that office code or office number 2 is going to be closed, and all the employees that work at office number 2 are going to move to office number 1. So we need to update the office code in the database. So we've written our select statement to select everything, and then we filtered on the office code 2 in order to do what we should do. That is always run a select statement before an update statement to make sure that we're filtering appropriately. So it looks right? So we're going to move our update statement is going to change office code 2 to office code 1, and it looks like our filter is appropriate. Now I went back here and went into preferences, since we're using where clauses now, and I updated the SQL editor safe mode. So I've turned on safe mode and restarted Workbench before. So I have this, and now I have my update statement as well. So update employees set office code equal to 1, where currently the office code is equal to 2. So I try to execute that query. And here safe mode is interfering with us because safe mode requires that we use a key. It's actually, I don't think, described that way. So in the SQL editor, safe mode rejects updates and deletes with no restrictions. So I have a restriction, but it's not a restriction on a primary key, and I think that's what it wants. Not just a key. I think it's actually even wrong here. It's going to require a primary key here. So, in my opinion, that's too restrictive to require a primary key because you can't update several records at once if you're using a where clause that only has a primary key. So I'm going to turn off safe updates and restart Workbench. Now running the query to update my office codes. So I can test my where clause here, or select my select statement to make sure that all the employees, so I have no employees now that report to office code 2, and I can see that all my employees have been moved to office code 1. So the select with the where clause, or the updates with the where clause, relatively simple statement, but a dangerous one. With update without a where clause, you should always look at. MySQL Workbench will stop you by default from issuing a update statement that's uncontrolled. But as we've seen, its control is a little bit too restrictive, and as a warning, it's pretty unique in terms of SQL clients to enforce a rule that SQL itself does not enforce. All right, that's the update statement. Next, we'll see the delete statement.